A Tale of the Holy Cross of Jesus Christ by R.D. Cruz. Part 4 of 8. Veronica and Matteo proceeded to Rome via the port city of Ostia, while Narcissus with Claudia returned to Jerusalem to resume his duties. Upon arrival, Narcissus received the sad news from his father Horatio that his mother has passed away. Jerusalem was undergoing massive reconstruction, especially the temple. Roman architects and engineers were hired to assume the enormous task. They had experience of maintaining the Pantheon and the aqueducts in Rome. Narcissus and his men were heavily involved with these projects since his soldiers became the foreman of all the constructions. He also learned to interpret the blueprint plans of the walls and tunnels of the temple. The walls had to be reinforced while the tunnels below for the water channels had to be secured. King Herod Antipas was very proud of the temple, so he occasionally gave incentives to the Roman architects and engineers. Narcissus and his men received pouches with 30 pieces of silver inside each. Narcissus joked with King Herod regarding Jesus, that this one that they crucified had resurrected from the dead because he was the Son of God. Herod explained that Jesus was just a magician. Jesus did not die, he only pretended to be dead, and the Christians stole his body, Herod insisted. Remember the same magic they used with Lazarus. He drank a potion to stop his heartbeat and to wake up 3 days later. Narcissus did not argue further because he was happy with his 30 pieces of silver. This meant party time at the local tavern with the women of the night. However, on one incident, while Narcissus was up in the scaffolding, it gave way, and he tried to hang on to the rope, but his hand began to slip, and he fell below. Narcissus' back was broken. He knew that his career as a soldier was over. He felt hopeless. However, that night he dreamt about the passion of Jesus. He remembered how he pierced Jesus' side. Then blood and water flowed. Narcissus recalled Jesus' resurrection and ascension. He asked for his red cloak with the blood and water stained from Jesus' side. He wrapped himself with it. He had a long dream that night. He dreamt of Jesus being tortured and crucified. Now Narcissus dreamt of Jesus' mother, grieving for Narcissus himself with his ailment. Mother Mary cuddled Narcissus in her arms and washing his face with her tears. Then he dreamt about Jesus. Jesus has been dead for 3 days. I walked towards the tomb alone, and I could see Jesus standing outside the stone door. I did not believe it, since this could only be an apparition. Jesus was not real because I saw him die. I ignored him and I approached the tomb. Grunting heavily, I rolled the stone open. I stumbled inside and it was empty. I felt sick to my stomach, so I drew near Jesus, but I had to be sure, so I knelt before him. I moved my hand to feel his wounds in his hands and feet to remove any doubt. I placed my hand on his right side to verify the laceration. I had to be sure. I closed my eyes. He placed his 2 hands on my shoulders. One hand was soaked in his blood, while the other was with his water. I could feel the heat permeating throughout my entire body. Now I could feel my spine experiencing the sense of touch. I could feel Jesus all over my body. I could not tolerate the sensation anymore, so I fell down completely and remained unconscious. A miracle had happened. The next day, Narcissus was cured and as good as new. Narcissus knelt down and prayed, "Thank you, son of Zeus." But he could barely understand that miracle. Days later, when Narcissus was back to work, Governor Pilate summoned him. Narcissus' father was dying. Narcissus had to hurry back to Pompeii, hopeful to see his father still alive. He was surprised to see General Vespasian and other officers comforting his dying father Horatio. They had been good friends in the army. A young priestess from the temple of Vesta offered prayers, but Horatio did not live long. Before his last breath, he tried to squeeze his son's hand. Narcissus was truly devastated by his loss. General Vespasian and the other officers offered their sincere condolences to Narcissus. It was a late afternoon. The shadow of Mount Vesuvius had cast a dark shadow in his father's room. For a moment he thought his father could only be sleeping, like the towering volcano on the horizon. Narcissus placed a silver coin, each in his father's mouth and eyes, and a pouch of 30 pieces of silver in his father's hand to pay the toll of the ferryman for the boat ride back to Elysium. Note that failing to perform this ceremony meant his father's soul would wander the earth to eternity. The priestess tried to console Narcissus, but to no avail. She wore a sleeveless, body-fitting white linen dress down to her ankles. Her jet black hair was up and tied like a bun at the back. She had a small rope sash around her waist that also formed an X around her breast. Her dark eyes matched her hair. Her skin had a healthy tan. She was as beautiful as the goddess Aphrodite. However, Narcissus knew that priestesses remained celibate all their lives, so their encounter would only be a fleeting memory. She also performed the prayers during the cremation of Horatio's body. Now Narcissus had to accept reality and had to return back to Jerusalem after the funeral services. Almost 12 years had passed after the crucifixion of Jesus when Narcissus asked for a transfer to the 2nd Augusta Legion stationed in northern Gaul. The Roman army under the leadership of General Vespasian was preparing for the invasion of Britain. Narcissus always kept the blueprint copies of the Jerusalem temple. He remembered meeting General Vespasian in Capri when the Emperor Tiberius was healed by the Holy Veil, and also in the house in Pompeii. With Narcissus' valuable military experience, he trained his 100 men, including the soldiers of the other centurions. General Vespasian recognized his excellence, so he immediately promoted Narcissus to tribune. Now General Vespasian shipped his entire legion across the English Channel. The invasion was not really that spectacular. The Britons with their backward army was no match to the Roman military machine. There was hardly any opposition. The Romans quickly and easily occupied southern Britain. The Romans built forts and garrisons to establish their presence. Years passed, yet not all of Britain has been subdued, except for the southern region. There was only one major battle against the Britons, led by a tribal king named Anamus Caratacus. He united all the local tribes and formed a formidable battle group of about 20,000 men. Caratacus moved swiftly and surprised the legion of General Vespasian. However, the other legions were scattered all over southern Britain. There was no time to regroup all the Romans. But General Vespasian was a brilliant tactician. With his legion of only 5,000 men, he retreated outside the mouth of a thick forest, wherein Caratacus would have to pass through the narrow clearing of less than a mile wide. This meant that Caratacus' numerical superiority did not matter. It was now an even match. It was daybreak. Narcissus led the front line of 2 cohorts of 1,000 soldiers. The weather cooperated with the Romans. It was a very foggy and as thick as pea soup. This concealed the small Roman army. The soldiers began to chant and shout loudly to feign a large army. Narcissus gave the order to the ballista commander to commence fire. A hail of javelins rained on the Britons. Due to the thick fog, the Britons panicked wherein the projectiles fell, not knowing their origin. Each javelin would impale 3 to 4 Britons apiece. This lasted for an hour. Then Narcissus ordered his men to form Roman formations of the tortoise. Metal shields formed like a shell to protect all around the group, with only long spears protruding all over. No arrow could penetrate the formation. Narcissus' men moved slowly. As they reached the disorganized rebels of Caratacus, the Roman army mowed down the enemy lines like sharp knives slicing through butter. It was a massacre. Meantime, Caratacus made a tactical error. Being a nomadic society, their elderly, their young, and the women stayed behind in the wagons. This meant that they blocked all the exits for the Britons in case of a retreat. That nightmare really happened. There was no way for the Britons to maneuver, being enclosed by the thick forest on both sides and the stationary wagons behind. The Roman army was merciless. There were practically no rebel prisoners left since they all died or they fled. Only the young and the old and the women survived to be sold off to slavery. But unfortunately, Caratacus managed to escape. Before the end of the skirmish, a long lost arrow pierced Narcissus' armor and lodged in the right side of his chest. The surgeon removed the arrow, but Narcissus knew that this time he was really finished. The arrow had punctured his lung. He could hardly breathe, but in his deathbed he remembered his cloak again and stained with the blood and water of Jesus Christ. He wrapped himself with his cloak. Narcissus fell asleep. He had a dream. I was at the Mount of Olives. Jesus has risen from the grave. I could see him talking to his disciples. I heard to beat the crowd and be next to him. I wanted Jesus to touch my chest wound. Jesus was wearing a toga with his right chest, exposing his wound on his right side. I dropped my shawl and showed him my wound. He touched it and blessed it and said, "Your sins are forgiven, my son." I could feel the warmth of his hand. Jesus said calmly, "But there is something I want you to do for me." At the same time, Jesus' body began to levitate. His feet left the ground. Slowly he floated towards heaven. I screamed at him, "What is it that you want me to do for you, Lord?" He smiled and blessed me. "Lord, Lord, what is it that you want me to do?" What? Let me know." End of part 4 of 8.